I just wanted to talk about a doomsday scenario that could be happening that would kickstart World War III between China, Russia, and NATO. There is an absolute major concern based just off of this invasion we've seen, and we've seen China not condemn it, along with India and a few other countries. But quickly on the whole Russian-Ukraine war, Ukraine's done a good job fighting off the Russians. The Russians, I'm guessing they thought they were going to get some type of support from many of the Ukrainian civilians. They didn't. They underestimated the amount of civilians that would actually fight for Ukraine. So Russia has shifted their strategy to a multi-week process of encircling and surrounding Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and taking it that way. And then they'll install their puppet government and go from there. So obviously Russia wanted to do this a lot quicker, a lot easier. They wanted way more compliance from the Ukraine citizens. It hasn't happened, and they've now shifted focus. Clearly, Russia will be capturing Kyiv just with the simple manpower advantage. If it takes whatever it takes, Putin's going to capture it at this point. Once you go in, it's like, emptying toothpaste out of the bottle. You've got to go. I mean, there's no turning back. There's no sort of, if Russia turned back now, they would be seen as the most pathetic country in the world at this point for doing what they did, and they'd have massive sanctions to face with absolutely no reward for it. At least now you're facing the sanctions. If you get Kyiv, you've got a negotiating tactic. You've got places in Ukraine you can negotiate with and continue to hold those. But World War III. So I've thought of an unfortunate scenario that would kickstart World War III, and it has to do with China. And I just do not understand many of these American politicians not making it a priority to view the country of China as the main enemy. Obviously, right now, people are looking at what Russia is doing. To the American people, Russia is the quote-unquote axis. They're the enemy. But you look at what happened during the pandemic, China recklessly letting the disease out of their country and into every other country, killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. And instead of us banding together and saying that's ridiculous and that China should have massive sanctions, specifically sanctions targeted at stunting their military growth, we've actually made it a Democrat versus Republican thing to where we're tearing each other apart. Are you vaccinated? Are you wearing a mask? This, that. And it's actually hurt the United States when we really should have used this massive political chip as a way to sanction and hurt the Chinese government and the overall military growth that China is experiencing. They are rapidly growing every day. And I think I know why there's no anti-China this, anti-China that. You look at these major corporations like a Nike, like an Apple, their products being made in China at for ridiculously low cost. If you can mass produce 1 million shoes in China for $10 as opposed to the United States, while paying workers adequate wages, giving them benefits, letting them create unions in the United States, and paying them it costing around $18 to $20 a shoe, versus in China it's $10 because you're using child slave work. Nike, Apple, all of these major corporations are going to go to China. And if we fracture our relationship with China, all these massive, companies like Nike, they're going to have to start producing some other place. They're going to have to find new factories, probably in America, and it would be significantly more cost to them. So there's no anti-China, even though you've got a free softball, just complete meatball thrown at you. They started the pandemic. They caused millions of deaths. Whether it was an accident, whatever, it came from China. And they're rapidly growing their military. There's no sanctions. There's no anti-China. And what could come of it, and you look at this, you think of Russia and China, and they have to be fuming at the overall influence the United States has over the world with their military bases and practically every other major country. They have to hate it. So you've got this NATO agreement, you've got the United States, Canada, North America, and then all of Western Europe in a massive military agreement. China right now isn't really in any sort of military agreement, and I liken this comparison to the one back right when World War II started between Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Those two countries really had no history of being kind of together in a military agreement, but they looked at the way the world was shaped. They said it would be in both of our best interests to become, to be in an agreement, and obviously Japan then attacked Pearl Harbor and got America into the war, and I'm sure Germany didn't like that. But I think right now, or not right now, but in the coming years, China could look at the current world and say it would be in our best interest to start a military agreement with Russia to rival NATO. And, that's all they have to say. You see how big NATO is. You see the influence it has. China says, we don't like that. Maybe even throw India in there. I'm not exactly sure why India didn't condemn the, Russian invasion of Ukraine. You've got all of Western Europe. You've got all of North America condemning it. Obviously, China's not going to. China likes that Russia's doing this, taking the heat off of them so they can continue to build up a massive military arsenal. I'm actually more scared about the Chinese military than the Russian military. This is just the military strength rating, and I'm going to tell you, if there is some sort of military alliance between China, India, and Russia, that is a major issue for NATO, and that would cause a World War III where the United States would probably have to fight China and India, and you would have the European countries, the Western European countries, having to fight the Russians. That's what that would create, and you just take a look at this is the overall military score index. You've got the United States in first place. We pride ourselves on spending a ton of money innovating, with the military. We've got unbelievable military equipment. But then you've got Russia, China, India at 2, 3, 4, and even if Japan is on our side, they are located in such a bad spot geographically to where they're basically on an island right next to a much bigger landlocked superpower that is China. I think Japan would just get, trampled on. I'm surprised Japan actually has that good of a military. That's really good because the United States is allies with Japan right now. But this is why it spells trouble. You've got the United States number one, but then all of these three countries and China and India in specific have huge amounts of manpower. Huge amounts of overall population. The overall rankings, I would actually put China at second and Russia at number 3, and the reason for that is because I think the Chinese are smarter and they innovate better and they've got better military technology. Both of these countries, very similar score. I'm not even sure what this score is. It's 0.0501, 0.0511. I guess if you just go to one of these countries, the United States is ranked number 1 out of 140. We already knew that. We understand what the United States is all about. I'm trying to see total manpower. If we can find the manpower, this is where it really, the available manpower. This is the major, look at this. You've got China and India. They're reproducing at absurd levels compared to United States. And then you're going to have some African countries there as well. But just China and India, they create this strong military agreement to rival something like NATO along with Russia. It almost seems like it's too perfect. These countries cannot like that America and NATO have this current world power, and you would think it's just human nature, create something to rival it. And it sets up World War III. It's just like, it's very similar to the United States and the quote-unquote allies in World War II versus Italy, Japan, and Nazi Germany, except now it would be China, India, and Russia, and that's 3 out of the 4, major military powers facing off against the United States, and then Western Europe, all those countries like Germany, France, Spain, the United Kingdom, they would have to probably battle Russia while the United States takes on both China and maybe India. I don't know what India does. They were saying India, had some business, but that doesn't, you take a look at everyone condemning this attack by Russia onto Ukraine. Even Switzerland condemned it. And the reason Switzerland, we all know how much they value neutrality. They always stay neutral. Because in this sense, at least in the Western world, being neutral is actually supporting Russia at this point because everybody is against it. This isn't a situation where the United States is on one side, Western Europe's on another side, this country's on this side. No, everybody is against it. So if you're Switzerland and you come out and you say, we're staying neutral, that's basically saying we support Russia in this instant. You know, I'm fine with neutrality, things like that, but I'm just saying the way this war between Russia and Ukraine is shaped, especially on the western side of the world, if you stay neutral, that is a bad thing. You need to be against it. That's why Switzerland came out and said, no, we're not neutral. We are against it, because basically everyone else right next to Switzerland on the west side of the world was against it. And then you've got India and China staying neutral, which is basically which is basically the opposite of what you would want. I'm saying China, they've got a massive military. They're growing it every single day. It's been, it's public information. China wants to become the #1 world power by 2050. Google it. It's anywhere. And it is just crazy that we're not seeing, well, actually, again, it's not crazy, but it is sad. The reason we're not seeing this anti-China rhetoric and not, this sort of idea where China is going to pass us, but nobody cares, right? The reason nobody cares is because all of these companies are in bed with the Chinese, especially in countries like Nike and Apple, where they're using slave labor to make their products very inexpensive in China. They're shipping them here, and then they're selling them at ridiculous markups. And they're not going to call out the Chinese. They're not going to say, we need to be worried about this. This country wants to overtake us, and this country is rapidly growing their military. We offer no sanctions against the Chinese for, spreading the pandemic to every single other country, including the United States, killing hundreds of thousands of people. And not only that, the pandemic actually divides America even more. So instead of uniting us against the country that caused it, we're actually divided now. Democrat, Republican, do you wear a mask? You don't care about old people. You're letting people die. And it's just like, oh my goodness, this is not what we need right now. Now everyone's united against Russia. But really, to me, Russia is more of a European problem, because they're landlocked with Russia. Now, obviously, China is not, landlocked with the United States or anything like that. But you look at just geographically, China poses a much bigger threat, not only due to their rapid military, not only due to their massive innovation. And I just think the Chinese are so smart, and just they have such an unbelievable culture when it comes to schooling, things like that. Not just that. It is the idea that, when you look at certain things, nuclear bombs, things like that, I feel like Chinese are more developed. When you Google, because people will always do this, when they're curious about nuclear bombs and they search who has the biggest nuclear bomb, it's useless. None of these countries are going to allow how big their nuclear bombs are at this point. They're not going to let it get out. Okay, whatever technology they have, they're not going to let it get out. So when you Google it, you're getting the wrong answer. You're getting a bomb that's probably been passed 10 times by different countries at this point. I know they say Russia has this bomb that's the biggest. I'm not saying this because I'm an American. Maybe Russia does have the biggest nuclear bomb, but I'm sure they've gotten them bigger now. We're at the point to where we do not have to test our nuclear bombs in the desert. We know they're going to explode. We know what they're going to do. We're at the point, in terms of technology, we know. We don't have to test them. They're going to explode. We know roughly how big they're going to explode. We've gotten to the point where we have the technology to where we don't have to test these things anymore. And when you Google these things, we don't know how big the biggest nuclear bomb that can be created, that is created right now, by which country. But if I were to guess, I would say either China or the United States has the biggest nuclear bomb. And I would probably say the United States. But China, they're right there. They've got such great military advancement. And this is the doomsday scenario. Very similar Axis versus Allies in World War II. Although I hate that saying, because if you're from Nazi Germany, if you're from Italy, if you're from Imperial Japan, you're the Allies, and then they're the Axis. That's why I like going by treaties. It'd be like NATO versus whatever a treaty comes if China and Russia and maybe even India want to get on a military alliance to combat NATO. That would kind of be the battle that takes place in terms of that. So guys, really crazy stuff. Again, when it comes to this kind of smaller war that we're talking about right now that's actually going on between the Ukraine and between Russia. Russia underestimating the Ukraine. Unbelievable job by the Ukraine civilians to defend their country. But what is going to happen is that Russians are going to encircle, surround Kyiv, cut off the supply chains to Kyiv that the Ukraine are getting from other countries, from NATO countries. Basically, every NATO country is sending Ukraine supplies, missiles, guns, ammo, things like that. And they're going to cut that off, and then they're going to take the capital. And Russia is at a point right now where they have to keep going. And I think it's going to get really bloody. A lot of civilians are going to die. Russia realizes it's like squirting toothpaste out of a bottle. You cannot put it back in. You cannot just say, oh, we're going to go back. Please remove all the sanctions. We're fine. Your standing in the world changed the second you invaded the Ukraine, and you need to at least get out of it capturing the capital of Ukraine. At least. That's what you at least got to get out of. I think what Russia thought, they'd go in, there'd be some, Ukraine people that would be okay with it. They would take the capital within a day. You would see massive amounts of people, and there have been a lot of people, but you would see basically everyone, at least Russia thought, fleeing from the Ukraine to the West. But that has just not happened at the level that the Russian military expected. You've got many people staying back, fighting for Ukraine, and they're getting massive amounts of supplies being poured in from Western countries, from NATO countries, to help Ukraine in this war with Russia. I believe I have a map, pretty detailed map, that shows the captured territories at this point. I'm going to throw that up. Captured territories at this point by the Russians, and they are going for the capital, Kyiv, so we will continue to see what happens there. For the next few, I'm saying this is probably a multi-week process of taking Kyiv, surrounding the city, cutting off the supply chains, and then capturing the capital if you are looking at that battle. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.